from the top of West Mountain of Scranton, Pennsylvania. Good morning, everybody. This is 94.3 FM, The Talker. This is Sanity Check. Libertarian Lou, Tea Party Mike. In studio today, Frank Sorek, where X is going to be joining us. We got the whole crew. If you want to join in on the conversation, you want to blow off a little steam, you want to start your weekend off right, you just call us at 888-577-4487. That number is 888-577-4487. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Lou. It's a beautiful day here in Texas.
It is here, too.
What's that?
It is here, too.
See? We're tag teaming in here today, Lou.
Yes.
But Texas is always an exciting place. And, just recently we've had I'm learning more and more of how the election process differs from state to state, Lou.
It sure does.
And it really does. In Pennsylvania, as I've seen in the past, you could have two good candidates, and if somebody doesn't like the candidate that might be ahead, you throw in a couple more contestants, and at the end of the day, it's called stacking the deck. At the end of the day, your individual gets in, whether they get 12% of the vote.
Oh, that's right, and that's if you're able to make the primary. But if you're not part of the Moose Club or the Elks Club, if you're not part of the club, Frank's laughing at me. Okay, we'll change that. If you're not part of the Donkey Club or the Elephant Club, right, you're not allowed to vote. But you're right, Michael. There are different laws throughout the land. Last week we kind of touched on that a little bit. Remember, we're a country of laws. We're governed by our laws. And if I remember, Mr. X had brought up a point about Conyers, and I wrote that down, Michael. Conyers is a lawmaker from Michigan. He's been there for forever, and he didn't quite get his required 1,000 signatures to get on the ballot. But no problem. We found a judge that'll just say, oh, it's okay for him to be on the ballot. And people wonder why we have lost our sense of humor, so to speak, or why people are not engaged in the political process. Because when we watch this tomfoolery going on over and over and over again, where there is no set of laws. The laws are set for you and me, Michael, and you, Frank. But for those that are in power, what the heck? Do we really need laws? Do we need immigration laws? Do we need Fast and Furious laws? Do we need any kind of laws at all? Only for you and me, Michael.
That's why we have these judges, to let us know what laws we should and shouldn't follow. I mean,
exactly.
And from a judge's standpoint, if you don't agree with the law, you interpret it the way you agree with it. And you say, you know what, Michael, that's no. The law might say this, but it was the intent of the law that matters, not the actual law as written.
Michael, you see, he's trying to get my blood pressure up. Where do I call? Oh, that's 888-577-4487 if you want to blow off a little steam. He's going to try to get me going right off the bat there. So anyway, I understand you had primaries down there just this past week in Texas. Michael, what's going on here? I heard there's some good news. If you're a Tea Party fan, I understand there might be some good news down there.
There is some good news as far as really principle. I believe, being a Tea Party individual, we want to follow the Constitution. And what we found here in Texas is that the Tea Party had an overwhelming success. I believe out of all the Tea Party candidates, only one failed to make it to the general. And I think that's really inspiring to me, that there's actually people that are listening and who are trying to find out who the individuals are rather than just the name. We had a gentleman go up against by the name of David Dewhurst, an established Republican, against a Tea Party guy by the name of Daniel Patrick. They're running for lieutenant general. And, boy, sure enough, once again, and just to give a little history on David Dewhurst actually ran against another Tea Party guy in the past by the name of Ted Cruz.
Huh.
And Ted Cruz gave David Dewhurst a shellacking for the Senate race. And as we know, many of us know who Ted Cruz is. He's a very outspoken senator from Texas who really tries his best to follow the Constitution, who has locked horns with the Obama administration on many levels. And so David Dewhurst tries it again. And once again, he gets another beaten by a Tea Party fellow, because this particular Tea Party fellow, again, wants to follow the Constitution, wants to follow the laws that Frank is talking about, and there's no exception. And this is what I find exciting, and I hope that we can continue to see these particular growth in the Tea Party here, and the Tea Party doesn't have all the answers, Lou, but I think it certainly has a better answer than the established Republicans have at this point. And the message is loud and clear here in Texas.
Well, Michael, though, I don't quite understand, because listening to MSNBC, they're telling me that the Tea Party is dead. Are you telling me something different?
I am certainly telling you something different for sure, and that was a real softball question, Lou, and at least here in Texas it is. Now, if you look in other parts of the country, like Kentucky, where Mitch McConnell, again, won against a very, very talented individual, and it was really there again, Lou, the fear of we can't get rid of the established Republican and fear of being replaced by a Democrat. I believe that's what happened here in Kentucky, but it's not happening here in Texas, because at one point you can't tell the difference between the Democrat and the Republican as far as the establishment goes. We spoke about that, and it's time for the change, and we're willing to take those chances on the change. And no, the Tea Party here in particular, Texas, is not dead, and I believe there's going to be a resonance again, resonating throughout the nation, that it is time to get rid of the establishment on both parties, Lou, because they are failing us. Frank talked again. I mean, all we have right now, I believe, is the ruling class versus the rest of America, and it's really time to stand up against the ruling class, Lou.
Well, geez, now I'm really confused, because what you're kind of saying to me is don't believe everything I hear on MSNBC, because I heard this week on MSNBC too that Pennsylvania is turning more liberal. Mostly because of some of the gay rights and stuff like that. And I'm listening to MSNBC, and what's that guy's name? Matthews, the guy that gets tingling feelings up his legs for Obama. That guy.
You talking about J.J. Murphy's best buddy, right?
It could be J.J. Murphy's best buddy, but I'm listening to this, Michael, and they're pushing this whole thing that Pennsylvania is turning more liberal. And I'm thinking to myself, that is not true at all. If anything, it's turning more libertarian, right. I would say, because most people, I think, in Pennsylvania, or people that are fiscally responsible or want to be fiscally responsible, they just might be a little bit more tolerant on social issues. And then when we look at our military, we want a strong military. Is Pennsylvania really
more tolerant? I mean, as I recall, they
passed a law, right?
Well, no. A judge overturned a law that made
correct.
Gay marriage legal in this state. But as I recall, wasn't this a referendum voted on by the people? Over 60% of the voting public voted to define marriage in Pennsylvania as one man, one woman.
Right.
And one judge said, no, Pennsylvania, I don't care what your population says. Pennsylvania has got it wrong. You can't do this. So even though the voters voted by referendum, one judge said no.
Well, that's what we love about these judges. But I think the point I was trying to make here, too, even though, just bringing this up, is that once again, it's this branding or brainstorming by perhaps MSNBC to say, all of a sudden, don't you see it's turning more liberal? And I'm here to say I don't see that at all.
It's being thrust upon us,
It's
Lou.
being thrust upon us to where all of a sudden they're starting to try to plant the seed in one's head that all of a sudden you're being more liberal. And once again, Michael, I guess my point is, and I think you brought it up, is perhaps maybe we shouldn't be listening to MSNBC and using that as the barometer for what the country is all about.
You're absolutely right, Lou. And you brought up the libertarian point of view, and I was at my son's Boy Scout meeting, and a younger fellow, I'd say probably in his 40s, and he's talking. He's like, you know what? And he admittedly voted for Barack Obama in the first time around and was completely disenchanted. And the second time around, just absolutely refused to vote for the man. And we were talking, and he said, you know what? I think I'm really the only ones I can now relate to is the libertarian attitude. He said, I don't believe in everything, but I do believe in their point of view that we need to follow the laws and that we need to have freedoms of the American people, and they need to be able to do their things without oppressive government looking down on them and pushing it. And that's truly the libertarian point of view. And I think any responsible individual has to, as much as they may dislike the libertarian point of view based on what they're hearing from guys like Matthews, that it really, really has some legitimate arguments. And I think that's why it's gaining popularity, because the Republican Party is only losing their power because they refuse to give up the reign of the establishment, Lou. And so people are looking for other answers. And here in Texas, they're looking for Tea Party guys and gals who are really, really ready to take on the establishment. And I believe in probably just a matter of a decade, you're going to see the establishment gone, Lou, perhaps a whole new party.
Well, let's hope so there, Michael. But I think what you're touching on, too, and Frank, is perhaps this myth. Certainly, I've talked about it for quite some time, is that if you vote Libertarian, say that all you're doing is taking away from the Republican vote or the conservative vote, and here you just pointed out somebody that just voted for Barack Obama, and once at least, and certainly now would look at a different point of view, and that's my whole thing is that we have competition on the ballot, and that's one of the reasons why we talk about it as much as we do, is if you have competition on the ballot, people are more apt to maybe get engaged, whether it's the Libertarian point of view, the Constitutional Party's point of view, you have the Green Party's point of view, and plus anybody else's point of view for that matter. I think we were just looking at this, or somebody just asked me the other day, they asked me how many parties are in Canada, and I believe there's 5 different parties that are actually in their parliament up there, and when you look at India, where they had hundreds of millions of people that went out to vote, and a large percentage of them, I think they're in the hundreds of people, parties that I think every block has a party there, but what happens is that gets people engaged about what's going on, and I think that's a good thing, and that's what this is supposed to be all about. We're supposed to have democracy is not supposed to be not all necessarily easy, but it should be messy. We should have arguments. We should have healthy arguments, but when we can't have those arguments, and I think that's what's so important about what we've been talking about is that we have to have healthy arguments. You have to be able to get on the stage, and don't be afraid that somebody's going to take your vote away. Just state your position, and people are either going to get on board with it or not. Frank, go ahead.
I totally agree with you, Lou. I think far too long we've had the two-party system paid for by the exact same corporations, and having a choice of two, take it or leave it, doesn't seem to be working for us. I mean, the country seems to be heading down a path that most Americans would agree is broken.
Let's take a call. We have a call on line 2 from Scranton. I didn't quite catch your name.
Oh, it's Kurt from Scranton. Hey, Lou. Thanks for being here, guys.
Hey, good morning, Kurt. You see, here we go. Now we got a guy. Now we got a guy from the complete left calling in, but this is good, Kurt.
Well, I'm a left patriot, and I'm trying to build a patriot middle, which is to have us agree. The Tea Party originally was about the End the Fed movement, which I am completely for, and I think we should stay on some core principles. And here's the issue that I'm bringing up here, because I'm sick of the two-party system. The biggest number of potential voters in Pennsylvania are independent voters.
You got it.
So here's what we should do. Make the primaries be paid for by Democrats and Republicans. If they're going to have it be a closed private event, which is what it is, make them pay. And do either open up the primary, change the dynamic. I think if you're a major party and you decide to have an uncontested race, you should be penalized, like maybe knocked back into a third-party position, because the two parties have failed us. They're not providing real choices. And what do you think the voting numbers were in the election of potential voters? I'd say it's probably below 5%.
In Wilkes-Barre, I know Betsy Summers was talking. She was a judge of elections and said it was just dismal, just totally dismal. And that's exactly what we talked about actually last week on our show, Kurt, was the fact that we fought a revolution over no taxation without representation. I'm an independent. You're an independent. We're paying for these primaries on our backs, taxpayers' backs, that are not part of the Moose Club or the Elks Club. I mean, and I keep bringing that up and as a tongue-in-cheek, but think about this. If you want to participate in our electoral process, you have to join a club. And if we just start changing names around, if I told you before you're allowed to go vote, before you're allowed to participate in the electoral process, you have to join the Moose Club. She said, what are you talking about? Well, let's just change moose with donkey. Okay?
Well,
go ahead.
I totally agree with you, but we need to have a vigilant citizenry that is ready to go protest, that's going to be lobbying, that's going to be doing the kind of journalism that you guys are working on, because the republic is dying. and we're going to have to take it back from Wall Street. And this. And I want to mention one of my favorite writers that you guys might know about, Paul Craig Roberts. Are you familiar with him at all?
No, I'm not. But go ahead. We're going to have to take a break, so get it in quick.
He was in the Treasury under the Reagan administration. He's a great patriot, and check him out, Paul Craig Roberts. And have a great day. Thanks so much for
calling.
what you're doing for America.
We'll be back. You listen to Sanity Check. 888-577-4487 if you want to join in the conversation.
Then you're looking for Sanity Check Saturday mornings on 94.3 FM, The Talker.
Don't listen to a word I say.
Hey.
Don't listen.
I'm not listening to you.
You never do, Lou.
I'm not listening to Lacey. I don't know this is Tea Party Mike. I want to listen to X. We're back. 94.3 FM, The Talker. Sanity Check. 888-577-4487 if you want to join in on the conversation. Michael, you see that? We have to bring X on so he can inform us. Good morning, X.
Good morning, guys. How you doing?
We're doing great.
Hey, I just wanted to touch on, the Edward Snowden interview that took place this week with Brian Williams.
That's exactly. I got all kinds of notes here for you for that reason. That's great. Yes.
Yeah, we've got this. You listen to him speak, and he speaks and has principles more than almost any politician you've seen walking the national stage today. There's a person that he's making the case, and just because at one point you have Joe Biden, he's out, and he's trying to tell Snowden that he broke his vows. Who broke his vows? Joe Biden broke his vows. Barack Obama broke their vows. Their vows are to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, not reinterpret it and abuse it the way they have.
Oh, and by the way, they put the hand on the Bible and swear they will uphold the principles of the Constitution. So not only are they breaking their vows, they're looking you straight in the eye and lying to you. I just had to throw that in.
Right. Let's go back. It's the year 2010. And Barack Obama signs the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA.
Yes.
Which, again, as we have seen, refuses to define what a terrorist is, what material help for a terrorist is.
If you carry too much cash.
Right. You're talking about prepping.
Anti-abortion.
Host Sanity Check.
This is what I got to deal with next now. Go ahead.
So what people don't understand is, I've had this conversation with numerous hosts and people across the country and so forth. They're not getting the fact that Snowden could not go through proper channels, because if you go through the channels, the government will destroy your life. Now, that was before. Now, if you're a whistleblower, how do you know they're not going to slap you with some sort of a terrorist label? Because remember, they refuse to tell you. And remember, if the United States government is prepared to kill a 16-year-old American citizen whose father was a terrorist, and there's no evidence we can see that the 16-year-old was a terrorist per se, then what makes you think they wouldn't kill Snowden? What makes you don't think they'd put him in a cell and he would disappear, and even though he's a citizen, he would have no right to a trial, a jury, even seeing an attorney?
Well, listening to that interview, he said he did originally try to go to the NSA General Counsel. He went to the legal authorities. He did raise questions. And then later in that interview, I have this quote down: if you say something, they will destroy you. Mm-hmm. And we see that over and over again, Michael, with the powers of government, whether it's in the judiciary, whether it's in the courts. We've been talking about that, where if you come out and they don't like what you have to say, they will come out and destroy you. And they have the power to do that. Mm-hmm. And that's, that was one of the quotes, Michael, that I wrote down, that they will come out and destroy you. Exactly what X is talking about.
It's really interesting, X, because I was listening to, it was a different topic. They were talking about the EPA and small business farmers, et cetera, that they cannot be trusted to take care of the environment. And, if I was there, here's the congressman, I'm thinking the people that we cannot trust is Congress themselves, and yet they have the arrogance to point the finger at the American public and say you can't be trusted. And I think Edward Snowden is an example of exactly what's going on within our government. And it really ticks me off to see that good guys like Snowden are trying to be demonized by this one-sided press to make sure that the agenda is pushed on. But America is one by one. We're waking up and finding out who can be trusted and who can't be trusted.
I'm gonna throw a question out to all of you guys, Frank and X and Michael, because this was the quote I think that. I certainly wrote this down because it definitely jumped out at me. He said, there are some things worth dying for. Mm-hmm. And, when we talk about World War II, when we talk about even Vietnam, when we talk about our security, it's always, what will we die for? What would you die for? And so anyway, he said there are some things worth dying for, and that is a free country. And when I heard that, that popped out at me. And then he went on, if we want to be free. So in other words, what are we worth? What would we do? What it is within us to say, okay, this is worth dying for. And I think most of us would say, if we're threatened, to keep us free. And then he went on to say, if we want to be free, we cannot become a security state. Mm-hmm. And he said that's why he was doing what he's doing, and he was very specific, X, and if you heard a good portion of the interview, and Michael too, is that there were a lot of things that were not released, so that some of this stuff that's coming out that he's put people in danger and threats. He says, where are they? Who got in danger?
Right. Well, let's remind ourselves the administration released the CIA head in an accident the other day. So maybe the administration's guilty of releasing or endangering more people than he did.
Exactly. Well, of course, your friend there, the spokesperson there, Carney. He was the one that released this stuff, and so anyway. So when we talk about this, what is it? I mean, I don't know who wants to take that over first. Michael, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Frank, and then X. But when we talk about World War II, when you look at our wars, and we always say, what is it that we'd be worth dying for? And then when he came back and said to be free. We're not living in a free country if we're living in a security state. I was just wondering what your guys' takes on it. Go ahead, Mike. You take that first.
So many times, I look at other nations who have really been oppressed forever and can't stand up. But the American will is different than that. And I agree with Ed Snowden. The security state just takes away more of our freedoms. And we are starting to see that, and we're starting to repel from that. You've seen that in the ranches of Arizona. You've seen it in the ranches of Texas. You could see it all over America, who, from almost day one, I considered Ed Snowden a hero, that he stood up and took it on the chin and really could be spending the rest of his days in jail or worse. And these are the things that our ancestors have come over to this nation and fought for. And freedom is a fight worth dying for, Lou.
And freedom is. So then once again, it's, how can you be free if you live in, a security state? Go ahead, Frank.
Well, we're always trading freedoms for security. And we saw that after 9/11. We saw that we need to take certain steps in order to be safe. And I think all Americans would agree that we want to feel safe and secure as we walk the streets of America. However, what freedoms are we willing to give up for that feeling of safety? Are we willing to say, we have to disarm America because, as we saw last night in Wilkes-Barre, 30 shots fired on Scott Street, and we know that if we leave guns in the hands of the bad guys, that we're going to have this issue. But do we trust government enough that they're the only ones that should have guns?
And X, I'm going to get to you, but Frank, you brought up a point there. When do you trade those freedoms? Right. And that was one of the things that was talked about in the interview itself. He said a lot of people will say, that's okay. They could check what I'm doing. I'm not doing anything wrong. Right. Well, and he specifically brought up is checking the Ranger scores.
Right.
And Snowden came back and he said, you don't understand. Yes, you think you're doing nothing wrong by checking the Ranger scores, but what they're doing is checking your behavior, everything that you do. Your phone now turns into a microphone. It turns into a photography. Yeah. I mean, and so anyway, it was quite quite revealing, the whole thing of, what happens when, just because you're not doing anything wrong, is it okay for people to invade your privacy? And is this the country that we want to become? Do we are we that shining star on the hill that says, no, it's okay? We don't want to become a security state like everybody else in the world. For myself, I say that's where I'd rather be. I'd rather come here, and yes, you're going to give up. Is it worth dying for on the streets of New York?
Well, look, I could probably say for all of us here, although we all enjoy having the show and doing certain things, I'd probably like to be sitting on the beach or maybe sleeping late on a Saturday morning, sometimes talking about this. But, one of the reasons why we get to this point is we realize that I feel like what we're doing here is a patriotic duty to safeguard, because the more people we can inform about what's really going on, makes us hopefully a better society that can prevent this constant erosion against the constitutional protected items that we used to think were in the out there that are now the government erodes every year. So the thing about Snowden, though, let's take one step back. Ask yourself this: why is he alive? And the answer is because the real stuff that would endanger people's lives and all of this other stuff, that's what he's holding above their head. Right. He has some sort of a poison pill or a kill switch that if Snowden dies, a bunch of stuff's going to get dumped as retribution. So that's part of this reason, where we're standing back. It's clear to all of us here, what he did was right. The problem, though, is convincing a brainwashed public that violation of working for Booz Allen, an independent contractor working for the government, is somehow, a worse thing to violate than when you run for office and put your hand on a Bible. I mean, he was outing the government for breaking the Constitution.
And that was brought up quite a bit in that interview. Being a patriot is protecting the country, and that's how he's looking at it, that he's protecting the country against themselves. It was... I would encourage folks to, check this interview out, and I think the second part is going to be on Monday, but certainly very, very interesting. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to stay on this, Mike, we're going to stay on this. I want to talk about the Espionage Act, a few other things that happened in that Snowden interview, because I think it ties into everything that we talk about and everything that we believe in. You're listening to Sanity Check on 94.3 FM, The Talker. We'll be back in a moment.
Some nights I call it a draw. Some nights I wish that my lips could build a castle. Some nights I wish they just fall off. But I still wake up, I still see your gospel. Lord, I'm still not sure what I stand for. What do I stand for? What do I stand for? Most nights I don't know anymore.
And we're back. I know what I stand for.
What's that, Lou?
Freedom and liberty. Yeah, how's that sound? Is that a canned response? You're listening to 94.3 FM, The Talker, Sanity Check. Tea Party Mike, Libertarian Lou, Frank Sorek is in studio. We got X on the line. X, you had brought up the fact that where would he go? What would he do? And he did bring up the Espionage Act. And once again, Michael and Frank and, we're not familiar with the Espionage Act. I mean, I guess unless you're thrown into this cauldron, who would know these things? He said, but part of that Espionage Act is there's no public defense. You're not allowed to bring out your information out into an open court. So here he is. He's hiding in Russia, and he's doing interviews with MSNBC. And that's how we have to proceed at this point in time. And I don't know. Certainly they mentioned Keith Alexander, the chief of the NSA, had no idea what records were taken. I mean, what? Every place we look, nobody knows nothing. All NSA, all our alphabet all our alphabet agencies out there. Nobody knows nothing. Who knows what's going on? And I'm going to touch on that certainly somewhere in this show because I listening to Congressman Marino on 94.3 here yesterday. He brought up some stuff which certainly ties into what's been going on in the courts and all these other things. But once again, it's a sad situation that somebody like that can't or is afraid to come here only because he's going to be silenced if he does come here. Right. Wouldn't that be better? Wouldn't that be a better forum for the American public if he was able to come out and felt free enough to tell his whole story? Who wants to jump in on that one?
Well, Lou, the fear and what I give Ed Snowden, because he was really on the top of the pyramid here as far as importance in this nation. And, even at the lower levels, I just think of the investigating you've been doing in the courtrooms locally, that, the fear is I'm going to be destroyed. And what am I going to do to be able to prevent that from happening? So it's really that place in time where do I do the right thing or do I protect my future? And sometimes that's a difficult decision, particularly if you have family and children, Lou, and you know how that is, and many of our listeners do that. You have to make that decision, and I give it to Ed Snowden because it was probably one of the bravest decisions I've ever seen.
Well, we can't twist off into that a little bit about the courts right now, and certainly we could continue to talk about Snowden interview and tie it into these other issues, but this past week I was on the road a lot, and I was able to listen to 94.3 FM The Talker on my BoldGold Media app. And I was listening to the David Madeira show yesterday on the road early in the morning. David, of course, is on 6 to 9 here, and I encourage everybody to get that app because you can listen to Sanity Check while we're on. I mean, all over the place.
Anyway.
I mean, really. I mean, think about it, Frank. Or X, if you're out in the Hamptons, and all of a sudden you're at the donut shop and people say, what are you listening to? Oh, haven't you heard of Sanity Check? I mean, this could be a hip move. Yeah, listening to Tea Party Mike and Libertarian Lou. But anyway, listening to the show yesterday and on the Madeira show yesterday was Congressman Marino, and I did call Congressman's office yesterday and set up an interview with him, not this week, but the following week. He's going to be off to Lithuania on a trip. But he was talking about Shinseki yesterday, and this was before, early in the morning before he put his resignation in. But the quote was by Congressman Marino. He said, if he did not know, he should have known. And what I called Congressman Marino's office about yesterday was our courts, Michael, X, Frank. If they didn't know, should they have known? And we've brought this up over and over and over again about the Kids for Cash. Conahan and Chivarella didn't operate in a vacuum.
Right.
If these folks in the courtrooms, all these people that are held up, like somehow they're supposed to know what's going on, and should they have known? And one of the things that we're researching is Rule 1.6, which is the attorney-client privilege. And if there's any improprieties, and some of the things that were brought up, we talked about solicitors last week, Frank, and if solicitors know there's improprieties going on, they can't talk. They come up. This is client privilege. And have these laws been put into effect to just hide what's going on in the courts? Once again, these rules have been talked into existence. They must follow the professional rules of conduct. Remember hearing that, Michael, when we were over there in Luzerne County doing stuff on jury nullification? Oh, it's the professional rules of conduct. We have to follow these rules. But as I've gotten into looking at this, and certainly, we all, Frank, I know you've seen it, the work that's done by these courts, I have been dismayed. Because, it was something I've never really looked into, but the shoddy work, the inconsistencies, the mistakes that they make is unbelievable. It is really unbelievable, the stuff that I'm seeing in the courts themselves. And then what happens is they issue these gag orders or they seal the cases. We're working on some stuff right now where they just seal the case. You're not even allowed to get your own stuff. So I'd like to think, what are you guys thinking about this? And, this whole client privilege and once again using that to perhaps...
Well, I would like to think that client privilege has a place in
has a merit, of course.
Right, because you want to be able to tell your attorney whatever he or she needs to know in order to offer you the best defense.
Stop right there for a moment.
Okay.
That's good, because I know you're relating that to an individual.
Right.
But now, when those solicitors, who is their client?
Well, that's what I was going to get to.
Good.
For the individual, how many of us, when we do commit whatever heinous crime,
Correct.
how many of us actually walk into our attorney and say, that's right, I did it, get me off? Because what's the chances they're really going to work as hard as they possibly can to exonerate a criminal? Some might. I went off and executed a busload of nuns. You know I did. I just told you I did.
Right.
But I want you to get me off from that charge, please. You think the lawyer's going to put his absolute best foot forward, or will you maintain your innocence even with your attorney in the hopes that he will think he's getting an innocent person out of it?
But once again, this is as an individual. I think the question I'm asking is that when we hire solicitors for solicitors, all this money that's being spent.
And they can only discuss it with the client that we're paying for, by the way.
Bingo.
Right.
And then we wonder why. And then when we look at some of the stuff that's going on, and we've certainly brought this up, Michael, all these inconsistencies, the mistakes, and then all of a sudden there's either gag orders, you're not allowed to talk about it. It just seems as though that they're protecting themselves and not protecting the people's interest, which is where
who they actually work for. Far too often, these solicitors want to say, well, I work directly for the city, the state, whomever. Well, who exactly is the city or state? Right. It's the taxpayers.
Right.
Those are the people that you represent, not the elected crook.
So when the elected crook goes to the solicitor and says, "Yeah, I'm an elected crook,"
right.
Of course, the solicitor can't reveal any information because now he has this client privilege.
Right. He would be disbarred.
Right.
I was gonna just jump in with this. Earlier you had commented about living in a prison state, and I kind of think this all ties in to the fact that, remember, in a prison, a place with bars where you're protected from all of these, that's the place where the average person has the greatest chance of being raped. This is a place where you can buy drugs.
Right.
So the idea that you can achieve some sort of a police state and everybody gets watched and you actually become safer. Yeah, you're safer from, maybe somebody driving a bulldozer through your living room or something like that. But this is the guys. And then the other thing about it is the idea that in this prison scenario that we have where we live in a controlled state, the Lakey experiments have shown us that, these people, they did it multiple times with half of the students are prisoners and half of the prisoners are guards, how those in positions of power naturally gravitate towards abuse of power. So the real key in all of these examples of what you're trying to tie into with what's going on in local politics is you never want to have a person in political power or almost any front having so much power concentrated in a few in one or two hands. It always has to be diluted like a poison that you're always trying to protect against.
Well, actually you bring up a great point, because when I look at gun laws here in America, when you're looking across the southern border here, and when it says no guns allowed, and when we look as where is there more crime? Well, obviously in the country of Mexico, there is horrible amounts of crime. And they're violent crimes, from the drug lords to wherever. And who has the guns? The government and the drug lords.
And it's illegal. It's illegal for an average Mexican citizen to have a gun. There's actually only one place in Mexico City, if I was reading the information right, that a normal citizen can go and get permission to have a gun.
That is correct. So the whole point of it is, though that's supposed to make us safer access, the point that you bring up, in reality it doesn't. Because if we wait for, first of all, as we're finding, I'm becoming more suspicious of government every day. And when I look at the police force, even if you have well-intended officers, they can't be everywhere all at the same time. So I need, myself personally, to be able to have the means to be able to protect myself and my family. And that comes no matter what the left says in the way of having a firearm.
There's a great thing I learned this past week. There was a woman by the name of Georgia Tan She's the one that used to run an adoption agency. She's the one that got all of these blonde-headed, blue-eyed babies for stars like Joan Crawford and so forth. And she is the largest female mass murderer in U.S. history. Now, everybody says the word Ted Bundy and all of these others, Jeffrey Dahmers and stuff that can roll off your tongue. But what happened was she ran a fake orphanage and that would steal babies. And it wasn't just her paying. She was paying people to scout for babies, steal babies. You know, you would go in and you're a low economic mother. You have a baby, and then you'd hear your baby crying in the background, and then they tell you that the baby was stillborn and they disposed of the body. Now, the interesting thing that her mass murderer of all history in U.S. history comes into play is the fact that she was enabled to do this because those within positions of power in the state itself were being paid off. So when you sit here and you go, oh, nothing like that can happen. Look, there was mass murderer. They think they have her between 50 and 100 children were killed by her at her hands during this period of time, and they never prosecuted her. They never she died before they can send her to prison. But the law enforcement was involved. So don't ever kid yourself and somehow think, oh, we keep maturing to some level of higher consciousness. Okay? But the reason you don't hear about Georgia Tan is because she was involved with the local people in committing her crimes. Because so much money was flowing around, they all looked the other way.
Being involved with the local authorities in committing crimes sounds like a local tower I heard of in Wilkes-Barre.
A lot of this stuff, Frank, that's going on locally and throughout communities in the United States. And that's one of the reasons why you need to have sunshine. You need to have, and certainly with these courts. And that's where I have some problem with our legislators right now. We're heading into an election cycle here. We need to know where they stand, and are they willing to stand up to the judiciary? We've pointed out that the head of the judiciary in Pennsylvania on the Senate side, Greenleaf, the great majority of his campaign contributions come from the Bar Association.
Right. Every elected official runs and tells you, I'm going to do everything in my power to help you, Lou.
Yeah.
So give me your vote. What they really mean is I'll do what I can to help you as long as I'm not limiting my power. Because the minute you ask me to do something that might limit my reelection chances or
stand up to their leadership.
Right. Exactly. I'm not going to do that because if I do that, I won't be here. And then, of course, I can't do any good for you.
We need to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to be wrapping up that quick. 94.3 FM, The Talk. You listen to Sanity.
All this time I was finding myself and I didn't know I was lost.
So wake me up. Michael, you got to wake me up. 94.3 FM, The Talk. You listen to Sanity. Check 888-577-4487. Folks, the more we look into it, the Independent Gazette, Sanity Check, and certainly we encourage folks to go to our websites and check out our store and a lot of different things that we're doing. Michael, I want to reemphasize that our new paper in Carbon County will be coming up July 4th. We're looking forward to that. Poconos is right there. We're just about ready to print down there, and certainly then we'll maybe have a Northeast regional a reach here a little bit, but these courtrooms are an absolute cesspool. It really is. The more we're looking into this, folks, I'm telling you, we've been hoodwinked. And these courts have just spoken laws into existence. It's not laws that have been put into place. So certainly we're bringing this up, Rule 1.6, and certainly we're going to stay with Congressman Marino, and hopefully he will sit down and have, really some tough questions we're going to ask him. But once again, as always, this is not ambush journalism either by Sanity Check or by the Independent Gazette. we will print in whole what is said, and that's how we learn, and we understand how some of these things are put into place. But certainly jury nullification is another thing that was just spoken into existence. And, I'm reading some of the things here. Nullification is like any other democratic power. Some people may try to misuse it, but that does not mean it should be taken away from everyone else. I'm reading from Lou Rockwell, and the Chicago Tribune recently just did a editorial on jury nullification. And, they're trying to bring up the myths and all these other things, and they have 8 objections. And certainly each objection then is there's a backup to it. But just reading some of this, according to Cato Institute legal scholar Tim Lynch, it's part of the checks and balances in our constitutional system. Just as pardon power is used by governors and the president, juries have the power to bring back acquittals. I mean, it keeps going on. This is the history of that the founders knew. This was the background that they had in mind when they wrote the Sixth Amendment. I mean, and when you start looking at these things, and why have we allowed this to happen as a citizenry? Certainly the legislators have allowed things to go on in the judiciary. We have 3 distinct, branches of government, and there was a reason for that. And yet, in my opinion, the judiciary now has run rampant over everything. Frank, you just brought up a point earlier in our show. One judge comes out, it doesn't matter doesn't matter that we vote on something. It's unconstitutional. Who is this guy? Where did he come from?
Even though I wholeheartedly agree with his decision,
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. I mean, the voting population of this state said the law of the land should be this.
Right.
And that's what was passed. And this judge said absolutely not. And by the stroke of a pen, it's overturned. And like I said, I'm happy it is overturned.
Where is our legislature? That's I think where we're trying to get to. Michael.
Well, Lou, there's always that, and I always have this struggle with, are we a democracy or are we a republic? I think huge difference. Democracy, the masses rule. In a republic, we follow the laws. So that is always that balancing act. So, when I look at this and say, okay, who is deciding what the laws are? And that's what the key is here. Who has determined what the laws mean? And many times, that's what our judges are doing. They have decided that they're going to somehow interpret it the way the rest of the nation has, completely contrary to what the rest of the nation has done. So I think this is where we need to rein in, to get clear definitions or clear understanding of what each part of the Constitution states. So again, we need to be always vigilant that we are a republic and not a democracy.
And the judiciary is supposed to look at the laws and judge if it's constitutional or not. Part of the problem, and really not even part of the problem, very much of the problem is that a lot of these laws or rules that we live by were never laws in the first place. I mean, I think that's it. And I think that's the point. If we get any point across today at all is that these have just been spoken into existence by a judiciary saying, these are the rules we're going to live by. In Pennsylvania, we've had on who ran for Senate, Michael. The name's skipping my, and he spoke about jury nullification.
Mark Scaringi.
Remember we had Scaringi on. He says, if we bring up jury nullification, we're going to be held in contempt. We're going to be thrown in jail. Well, where did this come from? There is no law on the books that says that they have that right to do that, except for the fact that they're throwing this out there, and in the rules of behavior there, or whatever whatever they put up and that's my point is that they've just spoken these things into existence, and that's where we need a legislature to start stepping in and say, wait a minute. You had no right to just speak these in, but they're not willing to rule in this judiciary. When we look at, folks, I'm telling you got to start really looking at this and then how many lawyers are in our legislature? It's
true. When you want to take a look at the marriage issue, because that's what we're doing, is just having to have a marriage license, in my opinion, is unconstitutional. So maybe we ought to start there when it comes to this subject. Just like you said, there's so many things that to do to control the people. And that's what bothers me with the whole idea of a marriage license. And Lou, you were the first one to actually bring up that concept to me. And the more and more I think of it is, why does the government even in the way of our marriages? That should be between you and your pastor or your rabbi or your priest.
If you're conservative out there, Michael, if you're a conservative, why do you feel there's a need to go to the altar of Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid to get permission to get married? Think about that, guys. Why?